To understand the Book of Mormon, it helps to imagine a record that isn't just a history, but a long, multi-generational struggle between two different ways of living. The book presents itself as a translation of ancient gold plates, brought forth by Joseph Smith in the early 19th century, detailing the lives of people who lived in the Americas for centuries before the arrival of Christ in the New World. The story begins in Jerusalem. Around 600 BC, a man named Lehi receives a vision that the city is about to be destroyed. Following a divine command, he takes his family and escapes into the wilderness. This departure isn't just a physical move, it's the beginning of a deep, recurring family conflict that will define the entire narrative. Lehi's sons are divided. There is Nephi, who is characterized by his obedience and his desire to follow God's commands even when they seem impossible. Then there are his older brothers, Laman and Lemuel, who are characterized by resentment and a refusal to accept their father's direction. This tension is the engine of the book. Before they leave, Lehi's family must secure the plates of brass, which contain the genealogy and the laws of their people. This sequence is one of the first major tests for Nephi. While the brothers argue and even attempt to kill Nephi, he manages to obtain the records through divine help and a great deal of persistence. This establishes a major theme: the importance of sacred records as a way to preserve truth and identity through generations. For the people in this story, if the record is lost, the identity of the people is lost. After a long journey through the wilderness, the family reaches a place they call the Waters of Bountiful. There, Nephi is commanded by God to build a ship. His brothers mock him, viewing the task as a fool's errand, but the ship is eventually built, and the group sails across the ocean to a promised land in the Americas. Once settled, the people begin to multiply and divide. The descendants of the faithful Nephi become known as the Nephites, while the descendants of the rebellious Laman and Lemuel become known as the Lamanites. For the next several centuries, the book describes a repetitive, almost rhythmic cycle of history. The Nephites often experience periods of great prosperity, technological advancement, and peace. We see this in moments like the Sermon of King Benjamin, a pivotal theological point in the book, where the king emphasizes that all people are equal before God, and that the only way to find true joy is through the service of others. However, these periods of success almost always lead to pride and the pursuit of wealth. This spiritual decay leads to social injustice and the rise of secret combinations, which are essentially organized, hidden groups of criminals who use oaths and violence to seize political power. Eventually, this internal rot leads to devastating wars. As these civilizations rise and fall, prophets emerge to warn them. These are men like Abinadi, who stands before a corrupt king to condemn his greed, or Alma the Younger, who undergoes a massive personal transformation from a man who persecuted the church to a powerful spiritual leader. These prophets often face extreme persecution or martyrdom, and their message is consistent. The people have abandoned the laws of God, and unless they repent, they will face destruction. The book also provides a parallel history through the account of the Jaredites, an even earlier civilization. Their story, found in the Book of Ether, is a cautionary tale of extreme prosperity and massive technological feats. They even traveled across the ocean in 8 barges. But despite their beginnings, they ultimately destroyed themselves through internal strife and the influence of those same secret societies. Their total annihilation serves as a dark mirror to the Nephite experience, showing that no matter how advanced a civilization is, it cannot survive the collapse of its own morality. The spiritual climax of the book occurs when the promises of the prophets are finally realized. The record describes the appearance of the resurrected Jesus Christ to the Nephites. He descends from heaven, stands among the people, and allows them to feel the wounds in his hands and feet. In this moment, he institutes the sacrament, a ritual of remembrance, and organizes his church. He commands his disciples to minister to all nations, establishing a pattern of faith and remembrance that serves as the spiritual foundation for the people's history. This event is the emotional and theological heart of the narrative, providing a brief golden age of peace and unity. But as the record moves toward its conclusion, that peace begins to fade. The scale of the conflict increases once more. The wars between the Nephites and Lamanites become more frequent and more brutal as the people drift away from the teachings of Christ. The narrative eventually focuses on a man named Mormon, a prophet and military leader who witnesses the near-total destruction of his people. Mormon is tasked with abridging the history of his people on the plates, trying to preserve their lessons for future generations even as his civilization collapses. He watches as the Nephites are overwhelmed by the Lamanites in a final, catastrophic battle at a place called the Hill Cumorah. It is a scene of absolute slaughter, marking the end of the Nephite nation. The book concludes with the testimony of Moroni, the son of Mormon. He is the last survivor, a solitary figure who spends his final years hiding the records and writing a final, somber warning to the world. He is the one who eventually buries the plates in the hill, where they remain until Joseph Smith is directed to them centuries later. When we look at the structure of the Book of Mormon, several major themes emerge. The most prominent is the cycle of prosperity and pride. The text argues that material success is often a spiritual trap. In this worldview, when a society becomes wealthy and powerful, it tends to forget its moral foundations, leading to a breakdown in social order and, eventually, physical warfare. This makes the book less of a linear history and more of a warning about the nature of human civilization. Another central idea is the concept of opposition in all things. The book suggests that for human agency to truly exist, the ability to choose between good and evil, there must be a clear distinction between the two. This explains why the history is so filled with conflict. The struggle between the Nephites and Lamanites is seen as a physical manifestation of the spiritual struggle between righteousness and rebellion. Without the opposition, the choice to be righteous would have no meaning. The role of the record itself is also vital. The characters are constantly obsessed with writing things down, whether it's the plates of brass or the larger records of the Nephites. The book presents history not just as a list of events, but as a testimony in writing. The idea is that by preserving the exact words of prophets and the specific details of their failures, future generations will have the tools necessary for their own spiritual survival. The record is the only thing that survives the fire and the sword. There is also a heavy focus on the concept of secret combinations. From a sociological perspective, this is a recurring explanation for why even the most advanced civilizations fail. The text suggests that when corruption becomes organized and hidden behind oaths, it becomes a cancer that can dismantle a society from the inside out, regardless of how strong its external defenses might be. It's a warning that the greatest threat to a nation is often not an outside army, but an internal decay of integrity. Theologically, the book is centered on the atonement of Jesus Christ. It seeks to explain how humanity can overcome both spiritual death, the separation from God, and physical death. The narrative argues that because of the fall of Adam, humanity is subject to these deaths, but through the sacrifice of Christ, the cycle of sin and death can be broken. This provides the moral framework for why the prophet's warnings are so urgent. The goal is not just social stability, but reconciliation with the divine. In terms of its historical claims, it is important to recognize the context. While the book presents itself as a literal history of ancient American civilizations, secular historians and archaeologists note a lack of physical evidence that aligns with the specific people and timelines described. Scholars often debate whether the text is a record of ancient inhabitants or a product of 19th century American religious thought, reflecting the language and concerns of Joseph Smith's time. Regardless of how one views its origins, the Book of Mormon functions as a cohesive, dramatic narrative. It moves from a single family's flight from Jerusalem to the total collapse of a nation, all while maintaining a consistent focus on the relationship between individual morality and the fate of a civilization. It is a story of extreme highs and devastating lows, designed to leave the reader with a sense of the weight of history and the importance of the choices made by individuals in the face of power, wealth, and survival.